We bring together scientific rationale along with clinical and commercial considerations in order to best understand where things are moving and how the value proposition of different therapeutic candidates might best be positioned.
Everyone, welcome today to our BioNeex interview with Dr. Sandler from Cello Health BioConsulting, previously known as Defined Health. Joe is an associate principal at Cello Health BioConsulting. Today we are going to talk about mainly upcoming Cancer Progress Conference in May 7 to 8, 2019 in New York City. I'm located in Berlin, founder of BioNeex and Bad Rafalian, and Joe is located in New York City. So Joe, welcome today to our interview. Please introduce yourself, a few words, then we can discuss a little bit then cancer progress.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Joel Sandler. I'm an associate principal with Cello Health BioConsulting. I've been with the firm since 2010. And I am part of the core leadership team for our oncology practice, which includes myself along with Jeff Bachman, Mike Rice, and James Lee. And together we work with clients primarily in the pre-commercial stages of development that are interested in understanding how better to position themselves for clinical success, as well as partnering and fundraising purposes. And so typically we work with clients that are trying to better understand, in the case of oncology, which indications, tumor types are worth pursuing, how the competitive landscape may be evolving over time, which is in many of the tumor types happening quite rapidly. And so in order to inform clients in this regard, we bring together scientific rationale along with clinical and commercial considerations in order to best understand where things are moving and how the value proposition of different therapeutic candidates might best be positioned to address those to address the rapidly shifting landscape.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. And as far I know, you are also coming from a little bit from the business development and licensing, from the scouting side of the industry, and I believe you make a very strong also value proposition for Cello BioConsulting clients in that therapy, such an experience with you, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I worked just very briefly. I worked for in business development and licensing for a Spanish company called PharmaMar, which is developing marine-derived small molecule therapeutics for different oncology indications. And then I've also worked more on the venture-backed side for small startups to understand how best to get investors and partners excited about their programs.
Great. So as we discussed, now we will jump in the topic of the third annual Cancer Progress Conference from May 7 to 8 here in New York City. And actually, we know that's a primary cancer conference in industry or industry leaders. So we know that you are covering there two panels, bringing leaders from the industry and making the discussion. One of your panels is going to be novel ways to target and develop therapies for cancer metastasis, stop spreading the new. So I would really want to welcome you to speak a little bit more about this panel, maybe about our panelists and what's going to be there, so what the audience can expect.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so metastasis as a therapeutic target is really interesting. I think if we think back, if we can remember the days before 2013, when before immuno-oncology really swamped the landscape, there was a period in oncology therapeutics where people were talking about immuno-oncology, yes, but they were also talking about other modalities or therapeutic objectives, including addressing metastases, but also epigenetics, cancer metabolism, and of course targeted signaling pathways. And I think each of these represented different pillars that people in the oncology field were looking at, both from an R&D and a business development perspective. Of course, with the introduction of Yervoy and then other checkpoint inhibitors against targeting PD-1, PD-L1, we kind of lost sight as a field some of these other objectives, or at least the way we describe these different objectives have changed. Mm-hmm. And so everything, I think, now has to accommodate the dramatic success and potential that immunotherapy has had on the field. And metastasis is no exception to that rule. I think the idea from a practical standpoint of targeting metastatic pathways has changed. Because the idea of a therapeutic modality that can continually be positioned to address metastatic potential of primary tumors doesn't quite seem so tractable. So I intend in this panel to talk about that, to ask my panelists about what are the different approaches and the level of enthusiasm for anti-metastatic approaches, and the extent to which this has changed to thinking about the therapy against metastasis as opposed to the therapy as a means to unleash the host immune response, which in turn can address metastatic potential in a more dynamic and hopefully robust fashion.
Yeah. I want to also ask you, like, is this still like regarded as a viable therapeutic strategy, or either alone or in concert with other modalities? Can you a little bit talk about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a great question. I want to ask my panelists about this. I have a great panel, and I think between them we can really get at that. My personal belief. And as a moderator, I can't bias panels, or I try not to. But my personal belief is that those approaches, at best, are going to be positioned, as I've said, as an add-on or an adjunct to other approaches, including, established and emerging immunotherapy modalities.
Great. And maybe like you can mention a few names of the panelists who is going to be there. From which side that we can expect in the conference, people coming?
Yeah, I don't have the list in front of me, but the I know we're gonna have Maurice Zender from Vaccinex. We have a professor speaking from Princeton, I believe he's from, as well as I think Tim Vanderhuen, who's the CEO of argenx. So they all have modalities, again, that I think are or have historically been labeled as anti-metastatic approaches. Yeah, or at least those two biotechs. And I think now, if you talk to them, they say yes, we're targeting metastases, but also figuring out how we can play best with immunotherapy.
Yeah. So then we discuss immunotherapy. I know you have another session. As a moderator, right? Immuno-oncology session. It's targets and platforms, target versus modality. What are the keys to the kingdom? It's a really very funny and nice name. I mean, we know it's a cancer conference, but sometimes also talking to Jeff, he's trying to make little bit interesting titles. So can you take a bit touch to the second panel discussion. What's going to be and what was the main points going to be?
Yeah. So this is an area that I think touches much more directly upon a lot of the client work that we do, which is companies that are developing or have invented different platform technologies that rely upon targeting via a tumor-associated antigen. And so there are a number of different tumor-associated targets out there. If you look at the ones that are actually in the clinic and have some level of validation, the number is actually considerably smaller than you would think. It may be 50 or 60 validated targets. There are a number of others, that, including many intracellular targets that are not necessarily validated in the clinical sense, but if you think of P53 and RAS, these are targets that I think people would love to get their arms around. But there is a lot of questioning, I think, among the platform companies that revolves around whether there is an optimal target or set of targets. On the other hand, there are a spectrum of modalities. I call them a spectrum when you think about naked monoclonal antibodies, so-called, versus antibody-drug conjugates, and then T-cell redirecting approaches, including engineered T-cells and large molecules. And each of these, I think, has a different value proposition in terms of efficacy and safety. And so understanding whether we need to really worry so much about what the target is and whether it has any whiff of off-tumor expression versus the modality, which, at least in some of the more advanced cell therapy engineering applications, there's talk of maybe, getting away with a so-called dirtier target through dual targeting approaches, for example. So this question, I think, is really going to be at the forefront of this panel, which is, do we need to worry so much about the target? Do we need to think more about the modality? Or maybe there's an optimal set of targets for a given modality, which I suspect is where we'll end up in that panel. But really understanding not only what is the best potential therapeutic target out there, but how to think about it from the perspective of your particular platform technology.
Yes, and from the emerging modalities that we can expect in the future, what do you think, where the industry really actually trying to go, and what are those modalities that might be most successful?
Well, there's a lot of talk about cell therapy, and there are all sorts of different engineering, gene edits, and various payloads and knockouts, knock-ins, knockdowns, that all of which could, and not to mention the targeting modality, whether it's a chimeric antigen receptor or a T-cell receptor or some novel targeting approach. So I think there's a ton of potential there. A lot of it is still theoretical at this point. Or at least in the R&D stages, and perhaps behind closed doors at different companies like Gilead and Celgene and their various cell therapy subsidiaries. So I think there's a ton of potential there, a lot of money in that space. But I think we're going to have to see which of these actually pan out in the clinic. Everyone in that field, I think, is really focused on how we get past the B-cell malignancies into other hematological settings and ultimately solid tumors. I think that's where kind of the big money will be. Yeah. And there's just a question of whether these logistical hurdles can be addressed or not. There are companies that are hedging their bets and saying, well, we're still going to need immunoconjugates, antibody-drug conjugates. That field has had a bit of a hype cycle where I think there was a ton of excitement. And then, drugs like Citrus and Kadcyla really did pan out, but a lot of others have languished in the clinic. So I think now that we've kind of come back to earth on the ADCs, we see renewed interest in that space as well. And then large molecules ranging from, kind of classic or FC optimized naked monoclonal antibodies to bispecifics and more complicated multi-specific approaches. I think those will continue to play a role, particularly because they're more in pharma's sweet spot with respect to CMC and commercial applications, as opposed to cell therapy, which at least at present remains more autologous and requiring centralized processing. But there are also a lot of companies and a lot of investment pushing to make cell therapy more off the shelf. So if that pans out, then I think, that combined with some of the engineering that I talked about a few minutes back, cell therapies could have a real sweeping effect on the field, but there are a lot of ifs in that sentence.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is a lot of recent years emerging biotechs that they are starting to focus on the cell therapy area, and I think they still are not sure what they actually going to be more attractive for the pharma side, right? But I think such a panel discussion, which is going to be in Cancer Progress, will give a little bit light on that, opening kind of the direction, and the discussion will help biotechs that working and investing a lot of money already in that area.
Absolutely. We'll get to the bottom of it. We always have great panel discussions. I always like to ask myself what I think the informed audience member would want to ask the panelists. And we like to make it much more of a discussion. We don't have people up on platforms lecturing about their company or their particular technology or entity. It's much more discussional in that sense. And we open it up to the audience for questions as well. So I think it ends up being a very fruitful discussion. Each of these panels, it often can get provocative. We encourage respectful disagreements among audience members and panelists, because I think that's where you kind of, if we can't get to the answers, we can at least get deeper into the questions and maybe understand what the issues are that people are thinking about and keeping them up at night.
Yeah, that's true. And I also highlighted it from my side, what Distinguished Cancer Progress compared to other conferences such as ASCO. It's more like a dynamic conference. It's more discussion and less presentations and data and information, like in a way presentations. So that's absolutely welcoming, right? To active discuss. And
yeah, it's great, and we have an audience. It's a cozy audience. It's maybe 150 people, 200 people. I don't think anyone is nervous about raising their hand in a full room. And we have investors, we have business development executives, we have CEOs and CBOs all the way down, and we have clinicians, we have key opinion leaders, and so I think and people who are thinking about things that are less obvious to people in our field, like market access and reimbursement experts, more commercially minded pharma folk, and I think getting all these people in one room and really hashing out the key considerations around issues that are kind of front and center in oncology is what the meeting's all about.
Yeah, that's absolutely great, because then it will cover not only for a very early stage of the R&D, but also in the later stage when companies trying to already think about their market access, about their pricing. And I know there is going to be another panel discussion from Ed Zeltzman, the founder of Defined Health, Cello Health BioConsulting, which will cover that too in our upcoming interview in a few days. Yeah, but that's a very important point that you said. There will be a lot of different people in the room, even like key opinion leaders. So that's welcoming really companies to be there, and to it's a huge contribution for their business development overall.
Yeah. Thank you. We try to make it just that, you know, everyone's busy. There are a ton of meetings out there. And so when people, you know, show up and register, we take that very seriously. You know, everyone's time is important. And so we want to make sure people are walking away with something.
Yes. So I'll then end our interview. Joe, I want to ask maybe the last question that we might miss through our conversation. What would be the last thing that you want to add to again highlight or emphasize to our audience? So that's, please, the stage is yours.
Yeah, no, I think that oncology is it's just crazy how much it's blown up since I've been a consultant in the field, and there's a lot of enthusiasm, which is well earned for the field, but I think there's also a lot more being tested in the clinic than the market can possibly support. So I think having an understanding of that, or just appreciating that fact, but also understanding kind of the science behind your technology. If you're a drug developer, an innovator, or if you're on the pharma side and you're considering onboarding something, or if you're an investor and you're trying to understand where to place your money, I think understanding the science behind it, how that translates into a value proposition, and how that value proposition sits within the context of the broader landscape, which is not just all the other things that are in development, but also what's happening on the regulatory front, the reimbursement front, and of course, at the end of the day, what patients need and what their caregivers and physicians are looking for in terms of addressing unmet needs is going to be critical if you want to play a role beyond just being able to raise a couple of $1 million or euros here and there in this current boom cycle, and really making sure you're positioning yourself optimally for where things are headed. And that's where we like to, that's exactly what we try to address with Cancer Progress and with our clients at Cello Health.
Great. So thank you very much, Joel. Thank you for being today our guest at BioNeex interview. It's really a pleasure to talk to you. So I want to remind once again to our audience that we're having today guest Dr. Dr Sandler, Associate Principal of Cello Health BioConsulting, previously known as Defined Health, and we're covering today the upcoming the third annual Cancer Progress Conference, which is going to be in May from 7 to 8 in New York City. It's actually the primary cancer conference for industry leaders, so we will be happy to see you there. Thank you very much, Joel, and have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.